Let me introduce myself first of all. I am Niall Walker. I own an insurance agency and have been in the insurance industry for almost 40 years now. So let me first start with the one coverage I think is the most important, and that's called auto liability insurance. Auto liability insurance is intended to pay what you are responsible to pay to the other person as a result of your negligence or mistake. So, for instance, you're driving down the street, you're distracted by your children in the back seat, and when you look up, you have noticed the light has changed on you, your speed is too fast, and you go through an intersection and hit a car that's coming through the intersection who has the right of way. You are responsible to pay for their damage to their vehicle and their medical expenses that may have occurred as a result of your injuries. And it could include things such as loss of wages for those individuals, pain and suffering expenses. It may even be some settlement for a wrongful death settlement, which could exceed hundreds of thousands of dollars and in many cases over $1 million. So again, liability is probably, I believe, the most important coverage that you should consider as you're purchasing your auto insurance. Now, I am licensed in the state of Washington, and in our state, an average wrongful death settlement is over $750,000. When you're looking at your auto liability limits, keep that in mind. Our state requires to get the little ID card to be legally okay to drive a vehicle and not be have to pay a fine. They'll allow you to carry a limit of $25,000 per person, $50,000 for injury for all people in the accident, and $10,000 for damage to the vehicles. That limit is exceedingly too low. Now, when you just even consider the value of vehicles that are on the road, you can't purchase a new vehicle for $10,000. In fact, many of them are selling for $50,000, $60,000, and even $80,000 and $90,000 a piece. So on the property portion of that liability coverage, you are at great risk if you're choosing to only do the minimum liability limit. On the bodily injury, hopefully you haven't had any recent stays in the hospital, but $25,000 would not pay for much of a medical expense for hospitalization, and certainly would not do anything for protecting you in the event of somebody that is accidentally killed. So again, I would highly recommend you review that coverage and its limits, and visit with your agent about that, or review the policy that you have, either electronic or if you have a paper copy, review those limits. Now, the other thing about liability insurance, again, you're protecting the other person that you're obligated to pay because you did something wrong. You made an error in your judgments which resulted in their injury or damage to their car or other property, including taking your foot off the gas or off the brake and accidentally put on the gas and ending up in the store's showroom as you go through somebody's building. In fact, I have a funny story about, well, I don't know if it's funny to the parents, but the local high school driver's ed teacher had twin girls who had just become old enough to drive. And one of his daughters, while she was sitting at the local grocery store, I don't know how she managed to do it, but she put her foot on the gas instead of the brake when she came into the parking lot and actually drove through the side of the Safeway store into the produce department. You can imagine how much the senior class and junior class of that high school enjoyed reminding this father about his daughter's accident. And I would assume the damage to that building was probably in excess of $100,000 to $150,000. So something as simple as that, and nobody was injured, could be a tremendous loss to whoever caused that accident. Now, auto insurance will pay the limit, up to the limit. They are not obligated to pay anything higher than the limit. So if you're carrying limits of $25,000, the insurance company will be very happy to write a check for $25,000 to whoever you've injured, and then they will close their file and you will be responsible for the rest. In some cases, once the attorneys are finished, you may have your wages garnished for years to reimburse that injured party for the damages and the expenses that they have incurred as a result of your mistake. Now, one thing that is not covered by liability insurance is intentional acts, including criminal acts. So may I suggest that if you rob a bank, don't consider that your insurance policy is going to protect you in your high-speed getaway, because it will not, because that would be a criminal or intentional act. The philosophy behind that is they want to make sure that if you're doing something wrong and you should be criminally held responsible for it, that you actually pay for it, not an insurance company pays for it. So that's a legal understanding that's part of an auto insurance policy. So again, that was your liability portion of your policy, the one that you should consider reviewing your limits. Number one in priority, and make sure that those limits are adequate. The next coverage, which is also very important, is the one called Uninsured Motorist or Underinsured Motorist. Now in our state of Washington, we find that about 3 out of 10 drivers are either not insured or underinsured. Actually, 3 out of 10 drivers are not insured, and there's more than that that are underinsured. So let's suppose that you are driving down the road and you are hit in the intersection by somebody that failed to stop at the stop sign. And they've ran into you and injured you and damaged your vehicle. Their liability policy would be responsible to pay for your injuries and the damages to your vehicle. But let's suppose they either don't have any insurance, or they are doing only what is required by law and only carrying the $25,000 limit. Your injuries, including your medical expenses and the wages that you may lose because you're unable to work for 2 or 3 months, would quickly exceed their policy limits, and they would write a check for $25,000 to you to compensate you. You have the right to sue the other driver, but if they have no income, and typically the ones that are not insured are usually the ones that are either unemployed or underemployed or have no assets and no way to recover a financial loss. An uninsured motorist pays you as if they were insured at the same limits that you have indicated on your uninsured motorist policy or coverage part. Most people carry the same uninsured motorist limits as they do on their liability limit, but you are not required to do that, and if you elect to use lower limits, most states will require you to sign a waiver that is indicating that your limits that you've accepted on the uninsured motorist is lower than your liability limits. Again, I think uninsured motorist or underinsured motorist is very important, because you don't want to have an accident where you have injuries and your occupants of your car, your children and guests and others in the car, are unable to recover their cost of their injuries because there is no insurance or the limits are too low for the one that caused the accident. There is another coverage that also applies to providing funds for you for medical expenses, and that's either called MedPay or medical payments. And in the state of Washington, it's called personal injury protection. Those limits are quite a bit lower. In our state, personal injury protection is either a $10,000 limit or a $35,000 limit. That particular portion of the policy pays regardless of who's at fault. So you could be the one that caused the accident. Somebody else could have ran into you that caused the accident. It doesn't really matter, because you can receive that benefit or that coverage, and they'll pay for your medical expenses, and there is a little bit of loss of wages in that as well, but they'll pay up to $10,000 for each person in the vehicle, and or $35,000 if that's the limit that you choose for each person in your vehicle, regardless of fault. Many times you'll receive that coverage first by your insurance company while they're fighting with the other person that may have caused the accident. So it does help in being able to pay for some money, some of those medical expenses before the claim is actually settled. Again, that particular coverage needs to be signed as a waiver if you choose not to have it. There may be some situations where you don't feel that you need it. If you have a very good health plan with very low limits, you have a disability coverage through your employer, then you may choose not to carry the personal injury protection with the $10,000 or $35,000 limits. Those 3 coverages are either insuring somebody else, or they're providing coverage for you and your occupants, like the uninsured motorist and the personal injury protection or MedPay. The next 2 coverages actually insure the vehicle you're operating. They are called other than collision or comprehensive, and then the other one is collision. Now, collision is pretty easy to understand. It's getting hit or hitting something. So if you run into another vehicle or into a brick wall or into a tree, the collision pays for the damages to your vehicle. And on those policies with collision, the collision pays for what you are, what the actual value of the car is at the time of the loss, or the cost to repair, whichever is less. So if you hit a tree and you've damaged the vehicle, it's going to cost $2,000 to repair it, and the vehicle is worth maybe $12,000. They'll pay you the $2,000 for the repair work. If you have another accident where the damages to the car exceeds the value of the car, maybe it's an older car you're operating, it's only worth $2,000 or $3,000, and the damages is going to be over $5,000 or $6,000 to repair, they'll give you the lesser amount or the value of the car at the time of loss, which would be the $4,000 amount. The comprehensive, or other than collision, is damages to your car that can occur without something hitting it. So that would be things such as fire, hail, flood, theft, vandalism. So basically anything that could happen to that vehicle, including a meteor coming out of the sky and landing in the middle of your front seat, that would be covered by comprehensive. The interesting thing is there's one loss that kind of is a collision loss, but is actually covered under comprehensive, and that's hitting a wild animal. So if a deer jumps in front of you, and they decided that that's a comprehensive loss, that's not a collision loss. Now there are some other coverages that are available on your auto policy that are really not insurance. They're more of options. For instance, one of them you'll be asked about a lot is going to be roadside assistance or towing. Depending upon the policy, some of them are very broad in their description of what they'll do for you, including giving you gas at the side or sending somebody out to unlock the car for you when you lock your keys in it. And they also will tow your vehicle to a place to have it repaired or come out and change your tire or whatever. Some of them are very broad in that, some are a little more narrow. So again, take a look at your policy, read that particular part, and make sure you understand what they're offering. They often will have a maximum limit, so if it's a towing bill, they maybe will pay up to $250 for towing or whatever, so you'll need to take a look at that. As I said, those are convenience. I don't really consider that insurance. It's more of an expense reimbursement, and for many of us, we don't need that. Certainly, if we have a bunch of other vehicles to drive, when we may not care if the vehicle is sitting for a little while. So anyway, so that's the towing. There's also one that's called car rental reimbursement. So if you wreck a car and you need to go rent a vehicle, they'll pay you for the rental cost of that car for a certain number of days or up to a certain amount of money. Again, take a look at your policy, read that, and if you have it, if you choose to have it, again, understand what they're offering you. Typically, limits are not very high. You're not going to lose your livelihood as a result of not having that particular coverage. There are two other coverages that I'm just going to mention because they can create a significant financial loss. One of those coverages really is an endorsement to your collision and your comprehensive part of the policy, which is actually insuring your car. So auto policies say that they'll pay the value of the car at the time of the loss. Well, unfortunately, if you are purchasing or leasing a new vehicle, and you purchase that for, let's say, $45,000, and you leave the parking lot, and 3 months later you wreck this car, the insurance company is only responsible for them to pay what the car is worth at the time of the accident. And so it may have depreciated from $45,000 down to like $36,000. Your loan may be higher than what the value of the car is, or the lease may have a longer term on the lease than what the value of the car is. Again, the insurance company is only obligated to pay you the value of the car, so anything different between what the value is and the lease amount or the loan amount, you then would be responsible to pay on your own. It's not very pleasant to have a new car payment, no longer have your car because it's been destroyed, and still be making car payments because the difference between the value of the car at the time of the accident and the loan amount is different. So I would highly suggest that if you purchase a new vehicle that you take a look, or lease a new vehicle, you take a hard look at adding one of those two to your policy. Well, I hope this was informative as you review your insurance, whether you're doing it yourself and purchasing your insurance online or whether you're working with an agent. You'll be able to ask your agent some very important questions with this basic knowledge of what your auto policy should be doing for you and your family. Thank you.